So before we start, a week from tomorrow, would be Wednesday night. For 6 weeks, I'm going to be teaching this course, The Bible and Science, Friends or Foes. And it's a 6-week course. You can download the workbook. And actually, if you come to the course, you'll get a workbook. But if you don't, if you just do the DVD, you can download it. Oh, sorry. But anyway, it'll be for 6 weeks, Wednesday nights from 6:30 to 8:30 at Good Shepherd Church down in off Carowinds, right off the corner of Carowinds and South Tryon, that area. And the whole 6-week course is only $15. So if you want to take it, we're going to be talking about creation, evolution, how Christians have viewed science, how we interpret Genesis 1, whether either of the Ken Ham or the Bill Nye positions in the debate they had recently are accurate, and if not, what's the third or fourth alternatives. So come check that out. If you're interested, it'll be every Wednesday night for 6 weeks, starting not tomorrow night, the week after. You need to register online for that. So to do that, you can either email me or go to gsumc.org, Good Shepherd United Methodist Church.org.
One more time, please.
gsumc.org, and click on the What's Happening Now passage or the Experience Kitchen. I can't remember which one it is, but they can give you information and register. Childcare is available for free if you have kids, so that's not an excuse. So come join us. It'll be a lot of fun. So we're back in Genesis 24. Last week we were in Genesis 24, and this week we're in Genesis 24. It's rare that we only do one chapter in 2 weeks, but this is the longest chapter in Genesis. So that's why we're doing it. We got through last week. What happened? What was the setting? Somebody catch us up to speed. Come on, I talk too much. Somebody catch us up to speed here. Share with us. Fantastic. You're paying such close attention. That warms my heart as a teacher. All right. So, we do. Go for it.
Yes, I did. Isaac was getting older, and he wanted a son he wanted a wife for his son.
Abraham
Wanted a son for his son.
Somebody help her. Bless her, Lord. Help her.
Abraham wanted a wife for his son, so he sent one of his servants to find a wife for his son. He had specific details, and he didn't want her to be a And he went, he looked for her, he found her.
Why didn't he want to be a Canaanite? Was he just racist or ethnocentric or what?
There were different things from the beginning. It went back to Noah and Canaanites and Ham. They just didn't want them to be a part of it. They wanted it to be, I think they wanted it to be, they didn't want them to be that because of the things from before.
He's close. You're close. Somebody help her. You're right on there.
They said that, God basically warned Abraham about the Canaanites.
Yes. God had already told Abraham the outcome of what was going to happen to the Canaanites in the coming generations. So there's a sense that Abraham does not want his promised seed, offspring, line of blessing to be part of the people that God has already said, I'm going to judge them because they are going to become irreparably evil. So there would be good reason why he wouldn't want him to marry one of the Canaanites. So he sends his servant, which is correct, up to his homeland, or the land that he had left before he came to Canaan. And what happens then?
He prays, and his prayer's answered before he's done about the first woman that comes that asks me if I want to ask for a drink, she says, I'll water your camels too.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And why is that an interesting, or what does that reveal about the character of the woman who would offer not just to give him a drink, but also to water his camels?
A lot of things,
We're showing her hospitality, but it also was shown, that would have been hard work to do. It would have been just a nice gesture.
Right. It wasn't just being polite. It wasn't, here's a mason jar of sweet tea, be on your way. It was a very much let me water your camels, okay?
Camels took a lot of
I
water.
got a lot of camels. They drink a lot of water. And has anybody ever watered anything by hand? Water's really heavy. Like, it's really heavy going back and forth, especially when we have to draw it out of a well. We just turn the faucet on and it's still heavy. But having to pull it out of a well, water all these camels and the journey that his servant's been on is a month at least, give or take. So thirsty camels, thirsty servant, and a very hospitable and generous woman is what he's looking for. He finds her before he even finishes his prayer. She's there. It's answered exactly how he wants it. So what does he do?
Ask her who her daddy is.
Yeah, who's your dad? She says, well, it's, and she explains, and it turns out that, lo and behold, it's Abram's family. It's the house of his father, so to speak. And so the servant's overjoyed, so he just jams the ring on her nose, puts bracelets on her arms, and that's that. No, then he asks her, she wants to bring him back, or to see the family. And so we ended last week in verse
About 30, I think you got.
Yeah, we were around 25, 30, somewhere in there. So we'll pick back up at 24, or 26. After she says, we have straw and fodder, we have room to spend the night. She basically says, come rest, spend the night at our house. Verse 26, then the man bowed down and worshipped the Lord, saying, praise be to the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not abandoned his kindness and faithfulness to my master. As for me, the Lord has led me on my journey to the house of my master's relatives. The girl ran and told her mother's household about these things. Now Rebekah had a brother named Laban, and he hurried out to the man at the spring. As soon as he had seen the nose ring and the bracelets on his sister's arm, and had heard Rebekah tell what the man said to her, he went out to the man and found him standing by the camels near the spring. Come, you who are blessed by the Lord, he said. Why are you standing out here? I've prepared the house and a place for the camels. So the man went to the house. The camels were unloaded. Straw and fodder were brought for the camels, water for him and his men to wash their feet. Then food was set before him, but he says, I will not eat anything until I've told you what I have to say. Then tell us, Laban said. So, how is he greeted by Laban? What do you say?
I think Laban's kind of greedy because later on, he tricks him and I think he saw the well, and so he was very nice to him.
Yeah, we get a sense in this in verse 30. As soon as he saw the bling, his eyes lit up. As soon as he saw the jewelry, as soon as he saw, this is a foreshadowing of the character of Laban that's going to come out later in the narrative. Laban's going to be a huge figure in the next generation. When he becomes, instead of brother-in-law Laban, when he becomes Uncle Laban to the promised line. And you're going to see this. You're getting a taste of his character right here is he runs out, he sees the man, and as soon as he sees, this guy's rich. This guy's wealthy. Come on in, and he says, I've prepared a place for you. He's just kind of sleazy a little bit. Not too much, not enough. At this point, it's, you can't judge it by just this, but we'll find out later his character. But you just kind of get that feeling of he's kind of a kiss up to wealth, and that's not going to change as the story unfolds. But anyway, he does do what's right. He invites him in. He tells him to come in, and shows him hospitality, and prepared a meal. And so the servant says, I'm not even going to eat yet. I've got to tell you this. This shows, again, this servant is intent on delivering on the promise that he made to Abraham. He's the epitome of a faithful servant. He's faithful to Abraham and he's faithful to God. If you see this throughout, his dedication is entirely to his master Abraham and entirely to the God of his master Abraham. He's committed. And he's a model example of someone who's sold out. He would likely have been one of Abraham's trained men, one of those guys that Abraham depended on his entire life. And there's the relationship of master to servant it's more like we view this a lot of times. We view servant or in the Bible the term eved, which can be servant or slave, and we'll view it through the lens of the horrible slavery and colonialism. But this is back before that. This is more of a kinship, patron relationship where it's almost like he's the adopted son. It's possible that he's the servant that Abraham would have given all of his wealth to if he had died childless, who Abraham mentioned earlier, Eliezer. A lot of commentators think this is Eliezer, this servant. Regardless of if it's him or not, this is the example of someone who's utterly devoted to not just his master, but to the God of his master. So notice the frequent references he makes to the Lord, and he uses that covenant name, L-O-R-D, in all capitals in your Bible. That's the name of Yahweh, God of Israel. So he goes and he says, I'm not even going to eat until I tell you what I'm going to tell you. And so Laban says, all right, tell us. Verse 34, so he said, I'm Abraham's servant. The Lord has blessed my master abundantly, and he has become wealthy. He has given him sheep and cattle, silver and gold, menservant, maidservants, camels, and donkeys. My master's wife Sarah has borne him a son in her old age, and he has given him everything he owns. My master made me swear an oath and said, you must not get a wife from my son from the daughters of the Canaanites in whose land I live, but go to my father's family and to my own clan and get a wife for my son. Then I asked my master, what if the woman will not come back with me? And he replied, the Lord, before whom I've walked, will send his angel with you and make your journey a success so that you can get a wife for my son from my own clan and from my father's family. Then, when you go to my clan, you will be released from my oath. Even if they refuse to give her to you, you will be released from my oath. When I came to the spring today, I said, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, if you will, please grant success to the journey on which I've come. See, I'm standing beside this spring. If a maiden comes out to draw water, and I say to her, please let me drink a little water from your jar, and if she says to me, drink, and I'll draw water for your camels too, then let her be the one the Lord has chosen for my master's son. Before I finished praying in my heart, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She went down to the spring and drew water, and I said to her, please give me a drink. She quickly lowered her jar from her shoulder and said, drink, and I'll water your camels too. So I drank, and she watered the camels as well. I asked her, whose daughter are you? She said, the daughter of Bethuel, son of Nahor, whom Milcah bore to him. Then I put the ring in her nose and the bracelets on her arms, and I bowed down and worshipped the Lord. I praised the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me on the right road to get the granddaughter of my master's brother for his son. Now, if you will show kindness and faithfulness to my master, tell me. And if not, tell me, so I may know which way to turn. Laban and Bethuel answered, this is from the Lord. We can say nothing to you one way or the other. Here's Rebekah. Take her and go, and let her become the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has directed. When Abram's servant heard what they said, he bowed down to the ground before the Lord. And the servant brought out gold and silver and jewelry and articles of clothing and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave costly gifts to her brother and to her mother. Then he and the men who were with him ate and drank and spent the night there. So, the reception, the recounting of the tale. What do you notice in it? What jumps out at you? Not much. Huh.
It was a retelling of what we already read. We spoke, months ago about how it'll recapitulate itself. It'll happen, and then we'll go ahead, and then it'll explain that it happened.
Yeah, in Hebrew narrative, there's repetition, and repetition is for emphasis in the Bible. Whenever something's repeated, it's because it's important. This story is repeated pretty much the same as the first half of the chapter. So what is that telling us?
That's why it's a long chapter.
And he's so transparent and he tells it all, and he even kind of reveals the wealth and all of that.
Yeah, he's
It's all
not.
out there.
Yeah, he's not hiding anything. He's just being very straightforward. What else jumps out at you?
He's talking about the Lord in the middle of it. He's doing this, he's in the middle of it, not just, hey, I found a girl, so on.
Yeah. You notice when he introduces it, he says, let me find the line. Verse 34. He said, I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has blessed my master abundantly, and he has become wealthy. Not, hey, I'm Abraham's servant. Abraham's the really wealthy guy. All right? Or not, I'm the servant of a rich man, all right? Which is what you do in the ancient Near East. If you were the servant of somebody who's powerful and wealthy, you'd introduce yourself as such. And you would talk them up and you would explain to them, But in this case, he puts all of the emphasis again on it's the Lord that's doing it. And that's the constant theme throughout Abraham's life is God is the one that has given all of these blessings to Abraham continually, whether they be material blessings, whether they be blessings of provision in terms of having the child, whether they be blessings of just the spiritual nature of becoming the father of all nations, and all of the things that Abraham's about, his servant recognizes is from the Lord's hand. What else? Anything else? Raise your interest in this retelling of the account.
They made a decision for her before they asked her.
Yeah. What do you think about that, ladies?
You wouldn't like that, would you, ladies?
It sounded like a rearranged marriage type of thing.
Yeah.
Equivalent to that.
Yeah. This is
Isn't that the way they did it back then?
we're going to see. There's they're going to come and ask her. They're going to bring her and ask her. But that is the exception to the norm, which would have been arranged marriages. And in the biblical time, and even today, I go to India, and a lot of the marriages in India are arranged. I have friends at our church who were in arranged marriage, and he lucked out. Because he married up. His parents did well. But there's, around the world, arranged marriages are still a fairly normal thing. We don't realize that because we are so inundated in Western culture, but marriages in the ancient world, and even in a lot of cultures in the world today, are not about just me and my sweetheart. They're about these families becoming one, or these families becoming connected, I should say, not one. The new family becomes one. So marriage was very much in the Bible the community emphasis of the two families.
We still try to arrange the marriages anyway, though, all the time. I've tried.
Try to play
My
cute.
kids.
Mhm.
Wait, you don't want to marry that guy.
Yeah. What you see in biblical marriages is there's not a one-size-fits-all type of marriage in the Bible. There's marriage that emphasizes the family ties. There's marriages that emphasize the provision of children. There's marriages that emphasize the provision of the woman that she's provided for in this culture when women wouldn't have had the means to provide for themselves. There's marriages that emphasize love, like you see exalted in Song of Solomon. There's all types of marriages. But it's something worth noting that the cultures are very different. And there's some ways where biblical cultures are the same and some ways where they're different. And this is one case where it's very different than what most of us experience, unless you're from a culture where they do arranged marriages. But anyway, it's interesting. I've had friends who do have arranged marriages. They look at marriage like we do, and they just think, why would you ever marry someone that your family didn't bring to you? Why would you ever try to? It's like a completely different mindset. They think it's ridiculous the way we do marriage. And they point to the late marriage ages, 30s and 40s before people are getting married. And they're like, what? This is ridiculous. Just get your family, get you a wife, get you a husband. And so it's different ways of looking at it, different cultures. And that's something that we have to be mindful of. It's in the text. Yeah. And it also tells you from Laban's point of view is like, this guy's loaded. Jackpot. Does anybody remember the movie Coming to America? Yes. Classic Eddie Murphy movie. Hilarious. And remember the dad in it, the owner of the McDowell's restaurant, when he finds out that Akeem's the prince? And he's just like, his countenance changes completely. If you haven't seen the movie, rent it, watch it, it's hilarious. His countenance changes completely. He thinks Eddie Murphy's character is just a fast food worker, immigrant, and then all of a sudden he finds out he's the prince of a nation, and it's just like he can't get his daughter married to him fast enough. And so that guy does kind of remind me a little bit of Laban in this story. I've never worked Coming to America into a Bible study before, so there you go. First time for everything.
Always a first.
So we pick back up. They're excited. They say, hey, this is great. Then verse 54. Then he and the men who were with him ate and drank, and they spent the night there. When they got up the next morning, the servant said, "Send me on my way to my master." In other words, I'm ready to go. Thanks for the hospitality. But her brother and her mother replied, "Let the girl remain with us 10 days or so, then you may go." Now this is not too much to ask. This is not them. I mean, that would be the normal thing. Is there be a period of the wedding's announced, the engagement's made, then the husband or the groom would go back and prepare a place, and the wife would remain with the family, and they would, there's this transition period. And so what they're asking is not inherently wrong. But in the context of the narrative, it's like they've already said, okay, you can go. They've already agreed to it. And then now when he's ready, there's a hesitancy. That's foreshadowing. We're going to see it later. It's going to come back the next generation, and it's going to be more expanded. But just note that characteristic of Laban and of this household is they agree, but wait just a little, so that's the tendency there. The servant said, verse 56, he said to them, "Do not detain me. Now that the Lord has granted success to my journey, send me on my way so I may go to my master." Then they said, "Let's call the girl and ask her about it." So they called Rebekah and asked her, "Will you go with this man?" "I will go," she said. So they sent their sister Rebekah on her way along with her nursemaid and Abraham's servant and his men. They blessed Rebekah, and they said to her, "Our sister, may you increase to thousands upon thousands. May your offspring possess the gates of their enemies." Then Rebekah and her maids got ready and mounted their camels and went back with the man. So the servant took Rebekah and left. Now this blessing that they speak over her in verse 60, may you increase to thousands upon thousands, may your offspring possess the gates of their enemies. That should sound familiar by now, because this is a reiteration, even though they don't know it at the time. This is tacking on to the Abrahamic promise, the blessing. What's that word that's translated offspring? You should know this by now. Seed, yes. The seed. This is a theme throughout Genesis, the promise to the seed. And so it's a speaking a blessing over it. May your seed, may your offspring increase thousands upon thousands. Just this huge blessing of fertility and giving rise to a massive family and massive lines of descendants. And then may your offspring possess the gates of their enemies. This was exactly what God promised would happen to the offspring of Abraham, to the seed of Abraham back in chapter 22. That your offspring will possess the gates of their enemies. That's a figure of speech. Does it mean that he'd go collecting gates or go from town to town? No, it means the gate of your enemy is a figure of speech that means the power of your enemy or the authority of your enemy. Or the gate represented City Hall. So saying possess the gates of your enemies is like saying may you become sovereign over anybody who opposes you. May you be blessed over anybody who would come against you. And there may be a hint of that in the New Testament when Jesus talks about the gates of hell will not prevail against this rock that I build my church on. Tommy, you had a question?
Just in verse 59, this is the New King James, it says, "and her nurse." And I thought that maybe I heard it incorrectly. What did you say?
Oh, well, the word is her nursemaid. NIV says nurse, but
so
you would think of like somebody working in a hospital. But it's the woman who, it's like the nanny or the trusted female servant.
So then that makes me wonder, how old would you say that Rebekah is at this point?
Oh, she's not very old. Yeah, she could have been late teens to 20s, maybe a little older. Isaac's 40 at this point.
But it wasn't that she had a child and this was like Rebekah. Absolutely.
No, this was the woman who nursed her, who would be her servant for life, would be the way it goes. Yeah. All right, let's see how we're doing. Okay, got to wrap it up. The epilogue here. Verse 62. Now, Isaac had come from Beer Lahai Roi, for he was living in the Negev. The Negev is the southern desert region of Israel. He went out to the field one evening to, NIV says to meditate. Other translations may say to relax, to stroll, to roam, to wander about. This word appears once in the entire Bible, and this is it. and we don't know what it means, but the Greek translation of the Old Testament uses the word to meditate. So that's as good a guess as any. Reading the commentaries and looking at the etymology of Hebrew, this is the fun part of doing studies like this. You come across random things, and one of them there's this investigation into this word, meditate, and the gist of it is, it's actually, it means to dig a hole or to dig out, and it's an idiom or a euphemism for to go out and use the bathroom. I thought that was pretty funny. So he's either out meditating in the field or he went out to number 2. Regardless, an amazing spiritual event is about to happen. So, God can show up whether you're meditating, whether you're on the John. So as he looked up, he saw camels approaching. Rebekah also looked up and saw Isaac. This is the Disney moment, right? This is they both looked up, their eyes meet, there's a long piece of spaghetti between them.
Hallmark Channel.
Rebekah also looked up and saw Isaac. She got down from her camel and asked the servant. And that phrase, she got down, it's in Hebrew, it's she fell from her camel, like she jumped down or fell down or came down fast. It's not like a leisurely, it's like...
It's not easy to get off a camel, is it?
Yeah, anybody ever ridden a camel? It's fairly cumbersome. So it's some translations like she hopped down or she jumped down or she made a beeline. She got down from her camel and asked the servant, "Who is that man in the field coming to meet us?" "He's my master," the servant answered. So she took her veil and she covered herself, which is a propriety, or she's not married yet, so she would wear the veil and modesty and all of that. Then the servant told Isaac all he had done. Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, she's deceased by now, but that's the tent that he was living in near Beer Lahai. And he married Rebekah. So she became his wife, and he loved her. And thus Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. So, in a Hollywood remake, this moment would be the climax. It would get all of everything would go into it if you were making this as a movie, like the seeing from a distance and the running and the music would be playing and there'd be a ceremony and all this stuff. In the Genesis account, very little space was given to it. I mean, think of the space, the 60-something verses that were dedicated to the pursuing of this wedding arrangement, and then it's over in a verse. He took her into the tent of his mother and they were married. That's it. It's kind of interesting because it puts the emphasis on, in this chapter, well, let me ask you, where does it put the emphasis? In the story of how Isaac and Rebekah met, which is one of the love stories in the Bible. What is the emphasis?
Obedience of the servant and faithfulness of God.
Yeah. The emphasis is on God providing for this and doing this and the obedience and the faithfulness of the servant. The emphasis is on all the things that were going on to make this marriage happen. Rather than what we typically think of as the good part, the love part, the romance part, all of that. It very much takes a back seat. Now, does it mean that God's not romantic? Does he not? No, the text, it ends there. It's very touching how it ends, is that she was the comfort. Isaac, the woman in his life, had been his mom. And she died when he was about 37. And so he had been grieving that, which any son would if their mother passed away. And then now it's like he's finally comforted. A new woman comes into his life who has all of the characteristics of godliness. She's willing to serve. She's willing to go, like Ruth is going to be later in the Bible. She's just like, I'll go. Mm-hmm. God, like Abraham was back in Genesis 12, go to the land I'll show you. Abraham went. So Rebekah, she gets presented, go to this house of this foreigner. I'll go. So there's a sense that her faith mirrors the faith of Abraham, and it foreshadows the faith of Ruth and of others who will step out into whatever God has for them.